what you see at Mindbloom is a company full of people who are able to examine themselves and their own behavior. I think psychedelic therapy is often a way of like giving feedback on yourself. You go into this session, it alters your consciousness. You often get like a bird's eye view of your own life or your patterns or your behaviors. There's this language that we all share of feedback, of growth, of perspective, of self-improvement and improving yourself so that you can also improve others' lives as well.
On today's episode of the Fahrenheit podcast, we're welcoming Michael Petegorsky. Michael is the Chief Strategy Officer for Mindbloom, the largest provider of psychedelic medicine in the U.S. and a company at the forefront of reimagining mental health care. At Mindbloom, he leads strategy across communications, legal, research, and government affairs, a rare blend of disciplines that really reflects the complexity and urgency of the space. From shaping public policy to preserving access to telehealth, Michael has become a powerful advocate for expanding access to evidence-based psychedelic-supported therapy. As a former litigator, Michael's path into mental health wasn't linear, but it was deeply personal and intentional. His work today sits at the intersection of science, law, and care, challenging stigma, championing innovation, and pushing for a system that better supports those who truly need it most. Welcome, Michael, to the Fahrenheit podcast.
You guys actually did one of the largest studies in psychedelic or in ketamine therapy.
Both, all of the above.
And I read some really incredible statistics that like 62% of people said they felt immediate relief. And I think 1/3 of them felt like they had really gone through what I was going to say was healed or cured, whatever language you want to use.
Yeah.
Is that work intersecting? Are you focused at all on working with veterans or the most sort of like at-need population?
Yeah, we actually started with programs just for depression and anxiety, and we didn't have separate programs for PTSD. But we kept hearing veterans kind of going through our program, talking to our clinicians and saying, hey, a lot of your content is really directed to depression, to anxiety. Yeah. It helped me with my trauma, but I think having content actually directed to those issues would be really valuable. So about 10 months ago, we actually launched programs specifically for PTSD, and those have brought in a lot more veterans too. The way ketamine works is not so narrowly targeted to one disease. There are different psychotropic drugs that target different parts of the brain, different neurotransmitters that might help more with one or the other. But when you look at anxiety, depression, PTSD, a lot of it has to do with rumination and degenerated neural connections in the brain. And what ketamine is doing is helping increase those neural connections and like rebuilding healthy pathways for communication in the brain. And so it can help all these things pretty similarly.
Amazing. Well, welcome to the Fahrenheit podcast. I feel like we've gotten right into it. And I think today, really more than anything, being on an entrepreneurial journey, whether that is for yourself, at an organization, at a company, whatever career you are exploring, I think so many of us are faced with the feelings, the universal truths of what it means to try and fail, of what it means to try and push through and break through boundaries. And mental health not only is arguably one of the most important factors in success or in growth, but in some ways one of like the hardest areas to tackle.
Yeah.
So I would love to maybe start out with like your own mental health journey and what ultimately brought you to Mindbloom or to these sort of alternative modes of healing and growth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the short version is I suffered from social anxiety that was pretty crippling for decades, and all the traditional treatments didn't help me.
Yeah.
For me, it started when I was pretty young. I won't go into all the early memories. You don't have to be my therapist today, but
it's like my side job.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. But, I can't tell you how many times I walked out of a date, a job interview, a high school graduation, dances, formals, whatever it is, because of panic, chest gripping, face sweating, fear, anxiety, and that fight or flight response that tells you if you don't get out now, something horrible is going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't know where it came from, but I went to therapy for years, didn't help. I tried pills. I was prescribed Klonopin, which is kind of like Xanax, a little different, and beta blockers. And those could work in an acute way. So before an event, I could take those pills and I would usually get through it, but they wiped my memory. And so it was kind of this devil's bargain of like, okay, I can get through this, but I probably won't remember it. I won't remember people I met. I can't tell you how many times I've said, hey, Mike Petegorsky, it's so great to meet you. And then, yeah, we met at this wedding. We met at this whatever. And I blanked it
It's
out.
jarring.
Yeah. It's horrifying.
Yeah.
And so I told myself a story. You're a person with anxiety. This is your cross to bear. You're just going to live with this forever. And the first thing that actually helped me was psychedelic medicine, was ketamine therapy. I was working as a trial lawyer in a big law firm in Manhattan. It's like the show Suits. It was actually like Suits. I had the mentor and the two of us. It was a whole thing. And I was kind of on the edge. I would take these pills to kind of get through, go into court, get through an argument, whatever. But it was really, a knife's edge. Like, am I going to blow it today? Every time.
Wow.
Dylan, Mindbloom's founder and CEO, started this company. He was asking me for some legal input, like, hey, I want to build a psychedelic therapy company on a national scale. And everybody was telling him he was crazy.
Yeah.
I was like, well, you are crazy, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. And he started the company. And so at first I was an investor and then I was a client. And I can tell you a little bit about my experience as a client, but it was one of those, oh my God, this actually works moments. And not too long after I left the law firm and came to work at Mindbloom full time.
What was that anxiety shift for you when you went from being, first of all, a lawyer to running strategy for Mindbloom, but then also having gone through this therapy and this work? How did that feel? What was that difference?
Frankly, I think psychedelic medicine gave me the strength to get off the treadmill of the law firm world, which is kind of that just, carrot dangling in front of you. And really, once I kind of conquered that fear of letting go of that and kind of jumped into the void of startup world, a lot of that fear disappeared. But I think really the psychedelic therapy was what helped it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can tell you a little bit about like that first session.
Definitely.
It was one of those kind of, it's really hard to describe if you haven't done psychedelics. It's like,
describe it for us, because I think there's also like a lot of fear associated with it. And what's interesting is I look at a lot of these new forms, and to generalize, like these new forms of healing, of recovery, whatever modality you're looking at, the hardest part is stepping through the front door. And I think there is this fear of the unknown, of the taboo, that keeps people from getting the healing or the support that they actually need. And I know that's true for myself, but once I stepped through the door and I saw what was available to me in terms of my depression, my PTSD, my trauma, my anxiety, it became this feeling or this understanding of like, oh, wow, there actually are tools out there to help me. And that alone empowered me in a way it is hard to understand unless you've really experienced it.
how did you convince yourself that some things could actually work?
Such a good question. So I think just like a little bit of my story, I have had traumatic experiences and events in my life with some of the people closest to me. I feel like I deem myself as like a dependent, if you will. So I am like the sister of, or the friend of, or the ex-wife of. And I came to a point in my entrepreneurial journey where I realized that my own trauma and PTSD was impacting my leadership. It was sort of like I had gotten to the ceiling of my ability to lead. And I knew that to break through to the other side, it actually wasn't working harder or smarter or reading a book by some amazing leader. It was actually my own personal development and growth and the fear and the anxiety that was stopping me from getting there. So I actually started to just do research because I, like you, I've been in therapy my whole life. I have a mindfulness practice and I believe in both of those worlds. And I'm so grateful for them, but they weren't enough in a sense. And I was looking for something to layer on to my practice. So I started doing my own research and I came across Rick Doblin and I came across MAPS and I started watching every YouTube of someone going into whether it's ketamine therapy or MDMA therapy or psilocybin therapy, everything. And I realized that I was curious and I was interested. And I was really lucky enough that I have a practitioner, a doctor in New York, who was the first call I made. And I said, I'm curious about this world. And she directed me to someone who had actually done and worked on one of the Johns Hopkins clinical trials.
Amazing.
And I was petrified. I was totally petrified. And you know, the feeling, I don't know if you've experienced this, I felt like I was doing something wrong. Like I was sneaking around. I think I lied to my team about where I was because I took 2 days off of work to do it the first time. So I like lied to my team about where I was going. I like didn't tell my sister. I felt like I was doing something wrong inherently because of that taboo that certainly at the time, and this is like 10 years ago, was still associated with some of these alternative modalities. So once I did it, I think it was an act of courage. And ironically, an act of courage to take care of yourself, which is such a backwards way of thinking.
The whole time you were telling us this story, all I could think of was how crazy is it that we live in a society where you had to hide steps you were taking to improve your mental health?
No question.
Insane.
No,
right?
And you know what? It was in New York City. I'll never forget this. It was in New York City. So it was in this woman's apartment, and I went up to her apartment and I did the 9 hours of therapy. And then I came down, and only in New York City, when I get into the elevator, I run into someone I know. And I ran in, and he was an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
He was an entrepreneur that I knew in the startup world. He was raising money. We had spoken like 2 weeks before, and I was mortified. First of all, I'm like in this whole new world.
Yeah.
I'm like a baby who had just like been born. And I literally am sitting there and I'm like mortified. And I'm afraid because I'm like, does he know?
Right. If I open my mouth, he'll
know. He'll know. But it's like, he'll know what? That I'm taking care of myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it is a very scary undertaking because there's a lot of, misunderstandings and misperceptions of what this work and this practice really is.
You hit on a few things there that I think are really important. One, I'm sure you found, as I did when you do the research, there's actually like a ton of evidence behind these medicines as being incredibly effective, safe, and fast-acting mental health treatments.
Yeah.
You read these articles like emerging treatment that's been around for 50 years or 100 years or 1,000 years in the case of psilocybin, and multiple thousands, and there's this weird fiction of like new, untested, and scary that's really... It's a press story, but it's not a story based in fact or evidence. The fact or evidence says this stuff works. And the question is, why do we have so much stigma around it? Why do we have so much fear and shame around it? And a big thing that we've been trying to do at Mindbloom is like make that accessible for people. We want it to be affordable. We want it to be something that fits into their lives, but it also has to be something they can tell their family and friends about and do in a way that they don't have to hide from their work or anybody else, And so part of the big project is moving psychedelic therapy into the mainstream of mental health.
Yeah.
Making this something that is for any American who needs help.
Yeah.
And not just a fringe treatment.
It's really interesting because obviously you guys are building, one of the largest, if not the largest, at-home ketamine therapy programs. And you are also a startup, right? And it's ironic in a sense because certainly one of the places in which we might be afraid, right, of the taboo or of people finding out is in the workplace, right? In the workplace where arguably so much of our anxiety, our trauma, our PTSD, our exhaustion, our burnout might actually be coming from. So what is it like from a cultural perspective to work in an environment where this is the product and this is what you do?
It's such a great question. And I laughed recently when I realized that probably at least half of my Mindbloom sessions over the past 4 years have actually focused on work.
Yeah, totally.
It's very meta, right? Do a Mindbloom session to improve my relationship to Mindbloom.
Totally. Do it at work, even better. Do it in the office,
But we have a few companies that we work with to provide Mindbloom as an employee benefit.
Yeah.
And there have been some news articles like so-and-so is the first to offer ketamine therapy as an employee benefit. It's like, well, we've been doing it since day one. Have discounts as far as possible to get employees at Mindbloom access to this treatment. And I think the vast majority do use it regularly because it works so well. For me, it's always been anxiety. I've never struggled with depression, but I think what you see at Mindbloom is a company full of people who are able to examine themselves and their own behavior. And one of the ways that it really improves our working environment is giving and receiving feedback. I think psychedelic therapy is often a way of like giving feedback on yourself. You go into this session, it alters your consciousness. You often get like a bird's eye view of your own life or your patterns or your behaviors. And you can see like, oh, you know what? Every time this person schedules a meeting, I bristle because I don't want to do it. And I'm actually avoiding talking to this person about some issue.
Yeah.
And so you have a company full of people that are examining that and examining their relationships and their patterns and actually having the strength and courage to talk through them because we all have this lingua franca. There's this language that we all share of feedback, of growth, of perspective, of self-improvement and improving yourself so that you can also improve others' lives as well. So it's like a really incredible place to work with everybody on that page.
Has that been like a input for how you guys are creating culture at the company? Or was that sort of like a mandate and part of what you looked for when hiring team members?
Oh, that's such a good question. Mandate, no, but definitely a cultural touchstone. We ask this question when we hire people: do you have a personal connection to altered states of consciousness? We don't require that someone's used psychedelic therapy to work at Mindbloom, period. But we find that we are a mission-driven company, and people who are mission-aligned, it's actually not enough. You need to be mission-obsessed. And we have an incredibly serious and rigorous hiring process. If you haven't read the book Who, you must. It's incredible.
Love that.
The best book on hiring I've ever seen. But we have this process where we really find out, are you obsessed with this mission? Are you unable to sleep because you're so excited about the prospect of bringing psychedelic therapy into the mainstream? And if you're not, it's actually just not the right company for you. And so we have a company full of evangelists, missionaries, whatever you want to call it, people who are really diehards in saying, this can transform the world. And we're not, I know every startup says they're going to transform the world, but in our minds, at least, we really freaking believe it.
Yeah.
And, we kind of got sidetracked. I was going to tell you about my first session because I'll tell you why I believe it so much.
Yeah, tell me.
I thought I was doomed to this. I thought this was just my life, right? And I went into that first section not really knowing what to expect. I had experience with psychedelics. I hadn't used ketamine before. And they say, okay, ketamine's a dissociative anesthetic. Some people, there's this semantic debate about whether it's a psychedelic. I find that completely academic and irrelevant. The question is does it alter your consciousness in a way that helps you heal? Yes.
Absolutely.
So you go into this session and, the way the program works, you have a guide who is really a coach to help you prepare before sessions and integrate in between them. There's a lot of research showing that just ketamine itself really improves symptoms of depression, anxiety, PTSD. But our core hypothesis is that when you combine the medicine with coaching and content and community, you increase both the magnitude of the benefits and the duration of the benefits. So you get more symptom improvement or even cure the underlying issue, and it lasts. So before your session, you meet with your guide. You get on Zoom. And so I'm in my apartment in New York. I'm in this little, tiny bedroom that we all had in these tiny apartments.
Yeah.
And I'm on Zoom, and the guide says, okay, what's your intention for today? Intention? I don't know what my intention is to do ketamine therapy.
Yeah.
What do you mean? He said, no, what do you want to work on? What are you trying to heal? And I said, well, I'm trying to heal my social anxiety. I'm trying to get to a place where this doesn't interfere with my life, where I don't have to plan all my activities around my anxiety, where I don't have to walk around with a key fob full of Klonopin and beta blockers in case something happens, or, all these things. And I said, okay, that's a lot. Why don't you write it down, journal, and try to have a single thought, one thought that you're going to go into this session, and you don't cling to it. You kind of hold it in your mind and then let it go. Because the medicine often is going to show you what you need to hear or see, not necessarily what you walk in with, but setting an intention helps frame it.
Definitely.
So I set that intention, and the app has this rich music library with all these different audio tracks. You can have spoken word or nature sounds or binaural beats, whatever your fancy. And you select one, you put on your eye mask, and you kind of just turn inward. You're not trying to meditate in the sense of clearing your mind, but you're just kind of seeing what arises. And in that first session, I had this feeling of being in an igloo. I think the igloo is relevant because part of my anxiety was around sweating. I'm like a sweaty dude, and I was always petrified of being seen as gross or weird or whatever.
Right. Especially if you're having the panic attacks or if you're having that sort of heart racing reaction to the anxiety, then it's a vicious cycle.
You're a genius. You hit the nail on the head because that was exactly what happened in this first session. In the igloo, there were these doors, and each door was an entry point into one of these situations where I would have that anxiety, that panic. It was a courtroom, it was a date, it was a job interview, whatever. And I could be in that setting without the physical reaction. I could be in that room and say, okay, I'm under pressure. This is a situation, I have to argue something in court, whatever it is, but my heart's not racing, or I'm not sweating, or I don't have that chest tightness, or whatever it is. And for the first time in my life, it disaggregated those things. It showed me it doesn't have to be this way. Just because you have that stimulus doesn't mean you need to have that response. And it was the first time the cycle broke.
Wow.
And it was one of those holy shit moments. The cycle can break, 20 years.
Totally.
I didn't know you could do that. And I got out of the session. I meet with my guide again. I'm telling him about these. He's like, so what does it mean? I'm like, it means I can fix this. It means that I'm not doomed to be this way forever.
Totally.
You can change your mind.
Absolutely.
And from there, I kept going back in sessions and working on that issue. I'd go back to the igloo, or I'd be in other places. Like, where else can I put myself? Where else can I be? And like the fact that I'm sitting, like, I didn't take any pills today. If I had done this 5 years ago, I would have been, jacked up so that I could get through this.
Totally.
And it's a miracle. I mean, just, recently, last couple of years, I spoke at a conference with a few hundred people, and someone I was on stage with shared her experience getting over addiction, and it kind of moved me to share my experience. And like that was the first time I had ever spoken at a conference without having to take Klonopin and beta blockers. I said that on stage. I mean, I'm getting chills thinking about it now.
Me too. Yeah, me too.
People fucking clapped, and it was just like, this is that moment. It's like a movie. It's like, this is the moment where all of that psychedelic therapy paid off, and I'm now like on stage in a crowd, completely, natural, comfortable and happy and thriving and energized by it. And it was like, that was the power of it. And so that first session for me, when that started, that was when I was still working at the law firm. But when I saw how it could help me, I said, oh my God, I want others to be able to experience this. I have to go work there.
It's so unbelievable because I feel like what you just said, I resonate so much with. And I think a lot of people who have done ketamine therapy or other feel the same way, which is the first experience is that aha moment of, I no longer have to suffer. It's not that you wake up and all of a sudden you're healed and life is perfect and grand. That is obviously not the reality of it.
Right.
But I think waking up from the experience or coming out of the experience and saying, wow, I can help myself.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can help myself. I have other ways that I never anticipated to fix that thing, work on that thing, grow from that thing.
You're exactly right. And it's not a magic pill in that you snap and it's all just cured, but it lets you start the work.
Definitely.
It lets you start down that path of, rather than being resigned to your fate, saying, okay, there's the light at the end of the tunnel and we're on our way.
Definitely.
And by the way, once you solve that thing, you're like, oh, what else could I work on?
That's me. I'm like, what's new in there? Like, what can I tackle? And to your point, when I first started in the work, I really felt like I had a secret. And again, this was like almost 10 years ago. So still in that era where it felt taboo. And like, how nice is it even for me to sit here and hear your story and be on this podcast and be having this conversation? It just is such an exciting time, one, to be in psychedelic medicine, but I think two, more broadly in mental health and in this idea that mental health is, one, a massive problem, specifically here in the US. And there are amazing people out there at every level of industry, of category, trying to solve it. And that this sort of like lid has been lifted in even us, again, being able to sit here and have the confidence to share our stories, is interesting for me. The first one that I did, I was on a highway in my mind. Not in reality, in my mind.
I was like, do not use
ketamine. No, absolutely. Do not operate heavy machinery or any machinery, including your cell phone.
Correct.
But I was, in my mind, I was sort of like speeding down this highway, and it was definitely like a desert at dusk. And I was seeing these signs and these billboards, and I realized that the billboards were me and my worst qualities. So the things about myself that I beat up, that I think of as disappointments or failures or things about myself that I don't love. And I was looking at these billboards driving down this highway and realizing that I was just passing them by, that they are okay. And I had this sort of moment, me in this car driving in the desert with all these things about myself, every failure, every disappointment, and sort of waving at them being like, it's okay. It's okay. And they don't have to create a car crash. They don't have to wreck me on the road. They don't have to dismantle me. Like, I can pass right by them, and I can look at them and I can have awareness of them, but they don't need to define me and the journey that I'm on.
I pause there. I'm getting choked up hearing this because it resonates so much with my own experience too. When you see that you can pass that stuff by, you don't have to stop the car.
No, you don't.
It's incredible. Thank you for sharing that.
No,
I
truly.
love that.
Yeah, my
It's
pleasure.
a really powerful visual. And I think so many of us have struggled with that. Like, you feel like you had a good day, you get in bed to go to sleep, you shut your eyes, and then you immediately start punishing yourself for the things you did wrong that day or didn't do or whatever it is.
Definitely. I call it my Arya Stark list. All the people she wants to kill, mine are not people I want to kill. Mine are like things I'm angry about or mad about. And it's like you put your head on your pillow at night and there's this list.
Yeah.
And I think what this work gives you is a way to work on the list that can be deeper, more connected to yourself, and also without judgment.
Yeah.
The challenge for me with therapy and with that work is that you're still going in with your personal bias.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're walking into your therapy with the bias against yourself and the judgment.
Yeah.
And I think when you are doing assisted therapy, you have an opportunity to remove the judgment and the bias and see things, you said it perfectly, at that 30,000-foot bird's eye view, and then obviously the visuals or the experience or the igloo help kind of create these metaphors for the stories that you want to tell within yourself.
And they give you something to hold on to. They give you a visual, an image, something like that you can return to later. It's one thing to have a thought in your head of like, I don't have to feel anxious, but it's another to like have a memory of not being anxious or a memory of driving by the billboards, like having that memory. And one of the things we're building at Mindbloom right now that I'm so excited about, we're incorporating AI to help really just drive outcomes. And one of the things we're doing, we're enabling people to use AI image generation to create in the app images of the things they felt or experienced during their session. Like if I had a visual back then of that igloo, I would have put it on my wall and I would have reminded myself every time I was feeling anxious or getting down on myself, like, hey, go back there, and so many people are having these experiences, whether it's climbing the mountain or seeing their mom or their dad, whatever it is. And so we're actually now giving people tools to generate that image, have that thing to hold on to, and have that totem to kind of ground them again when they start to unravel in some setting.
I may or may not have already tried to visualize one of my recent experiences with AI. So that is such a good example of like delivering on a product that your audience and your community really like wants or is already tapping into. It sounds like from talking about Mindbloom and sort of, I think first you were mentioning before, like before the actual moment of the product, there's also your prep work.
Yeah.
The setting your intention, getting on the phone with a guide. Talk to me a little bit about community and what community means for Mindbloom and how, as someone who is popping the lid on this alternative modes of healing, you guys are fostering and creating and serving that community.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I think we have an epidemic of loneliness in this country. And it's weird because we are both more connected than ever with our phones and social media, but also more alone.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we know is that psychedelics are a unique experience, and part of what can help you heal is actually sharing that experience, talking about it and hearing others and saying, oh, I experienced something similar, but maybe I didn't have a word for it. I hadn't crystallized that thought yet. But that sharing of experiences, that's really deeply rooted in psychedelic therapy. Before Mindbloom, if you ever go to a psychedelic retreat, there will often be integration circles before or after sessions. That was something we really wanted to build in. So part of the program, we offer these group integration circles that can be oriented around themes or demographics, whatever it might be, where you can see and be with other people who are going through psychedelic therapy at the same time and talk about and share those experiences. And especially if you haven't done psychedelics before, if you don't have friends or family or coworkers you can talk about it to, you feel a little crazy. You're like, it's like, I just saw this new color and nobody else can see the color.
Definitely.
And so it's like, how do I talk about this new color if no one else can see it?
I really felt like I had like a secret to the universe for the first few years. And it took me years to be able to even share it with my family, my friends. I was someone who was isolated in the moment. So I feel like community must be just such an important part of how, one, you continue to educate, but also how you, again, foster that feeling of not being alone and the continued healing that comes after the actual product is served.
That's absolutely right. So in addition to those group integration circles, we also have an online community that we're now moving into our app. But that's where people can continue to stay in touch and share thoughts, ideas. Hey, I just tried this practice. I've been meditating this way, whatever it is. People can kind of bring in other experiences and share them as well. But you're absolutely right. Like part of the work we're doing is to help the benefits from the medicine last. And I think community is one of the ways that happens. When you make friends, you build relationships, and you continue just talking about this stuff. It keeps it top of mind, and it keeps you working on it, and really brings integration from days and weeks to months or years, and continues that process. So, building that community even more is something that we're working on now. And the other side of it is taking people from that community and also pointing them outwards and bringing this message to other people. It can help, because the fact is, like, there are 50 million Americans who are going to take SSRI antidepressants this year. There are about 250,000 that'll use ketamine therapy or psychedelic medicine. And, we have a massive mental health crisis, and it's being driven in part because the last generation of treatments just aren't working for everyone.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that no one gets better. Everyone knows someone who's been helped by therapy or helped by SSRIs. I'm not saying no one's ever gotten better, but the fact is, if they were cures, if they were panaceas, we wouldn't be having this mental health crisis where, tens of thousands of Americans are committing suicide and dying from overdose every year. And so part of what we're trying to do with this community is also spread the message outward and let people know, hey, there's another option that can help you. And it's not some fringe new thing. It's been around for decades. And there are study after study after study showing how effective, fast-acting, and safe it is for depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, and even eating disorders, other things like this. They're really broadly applicable treatments. And ketamine's the only legal psychedelic today. We've got a ways to go on the FDA side. And I can talk about that too, because I've kind of been in that world as well. But using this community to bring others into the community is going to be a really important part of it too.
What has worked in terms of reaching potential audiences and the most, again, the sort of ones that are the most at need or at risk?
Yeah. Client stories. People receive information in different ways. Some people are visual learners. Some people are, audible learners. I think people tend to look for things that work for people like them. And so the thing that's really resonated is not, studies help.
Yeah.
We published this study with 11,447 Mindbloom clients showing this is incredibly safe and effective. And that helps with some people. But for others, they just want to see someone that they can identify with saying, yeah, I'm a mom, I'm a nurse, I'm a brother, whatever it is, I'm a human. This is how I struggled and this is how it helped me. And we hear time and time again that those are the stories, those are the things in marketing that resonate the most. It's not necessarily the appeals to authority. It's great when Andrew Huberman talks about ketamine. It's great when a new study comes out. But I think the thing that's resonated most is these client stories. And by the way, it's also something that kind of is the lifeblood within the company. Like you talked about our culture before, every day Dylan sends out an anonymous client story to the whole company. We have channels in our communication platform where people can just kind of ad hoc share client stories. It opens up every board meeting, every all minds meeting that we have. We always lead with client stories because for me, I was in a law firm a million miles away from helping people directly. When you're this close to it, you can almost become like blasé, be like, oh yeah, we transform a lot of lives, blah, blah. But it's like, no, every day we need to tell the stories of the people that are helped by this to remind us why we're doing this work, especially when it's hard. Startups are hard.
Yeah.
And so communicating those outwardly is really important to bring people in and make it accessible and approachable, but communicating them internally as well is important to kind of keep us on task.
What a nice way to put the customer front and center into every single thing that you do, right? Even something as small as sending out a customer testimonial every day or starting a meeting or a board meeting with that. I think it's so important because it kind of goes back to something you said earlier that I've been thinking about, which is like being obsessed. I guess what does it mean? Yeah. And by the way, I would agree with you, to build anything, especially a startup, you have to be obsessed. Yeah. You have to wake up and go to sleep every single night. At least for me, that is what has been true for me. Just deeply obsessed with what you want to accomplish, with what you're trying to do, your mission. So what does it mean for you and for Mindbloom to be like deeply obsessed?
I think obsessed means a few things. One is being relentless and not being satisfied.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's really hard to wrap your head around in startups is just because something worked yesterday doesn't mean it'll work tomorrow.
Yeah.
And you have to be obsessed to the point where you're actually re-examining the things you solved not too long ago because like
every 3 months.
Yeah, totally. And so being obsessed is okay, we have the best client outcomes in any study of ketamine therapy. What if we can make them better?
It's a ruthless pursuit.
Yeah.
Of your mission and of what you're trying to accomplish. And I think to something you said also, it is a constant evolution. And I think when you're growing, both personally and professionally from an organizational perspective, growth creates change and change creates kind of chaos, right? Like in a startup environment, we talk about Fahrenheit in our agency and we're about almost 40 people now. And I feel like we have to look at the org, we have to look at our process, our ops, probably every 3 months and reevaluate. Yeah. Because when you are changing and you are evolving, nothing should stay the same.
Yeah.
And so how, as a company and an organization, are you navigating that kind of change? And how do you navigate that growth?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we are a remote asynchronous company.
Yep.
And that is new for a lot of people who join us. We have no offices, we have no brick and mortar locations, we have no working hours. So we don't say, hey, we need you to be online between 9 and 6 or anything like that. We have people who are, around the world doing different things. And, one of our core principles is we basically try to be as minimal on meetings as possible. Right. And so
how's that going for you?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, so literally like the first 3 hours of my day, I just have blocked on my calendar that says top priority work.
Yep.
And no one schedules me during that time. I don't take calls or meetings. I just work on the biggest thing on my roadmap. And bringing people into that is a bit of a challenge, but it's one of the things we hire for.
Yeah.
Is like, can you thrive in this remote asynchronous environment? It means you need to write well, because we're not going to have a meeting. You need to write up a decision doc or an email or something that I can read.
The Amazon way.
Yeah.
Yep.
We use Loom a lot, so I'll read someone's doc, give them feedback, and send it to them. But we still have to evolve. One of the ways is like using new tools. Loom is a huge tool that's actually really improved what we did. And we were already light on meetings. And once Loom came around and we were like, oh my God, there's this way to capture our screen and record what we're doing and send it to someone, even fewer meetings. But we still iterate. I mean, I've been at Mindbloom for almost 4 years. We just moved our weekly leadership team meeting, which is like the one we have, from Thursday to Monday, which we'd never done before, but there were some reasons behind it. I won't bore you with them. We invited more people to it so that we could get more visibility into what everybody was doing kind of across departments, because we found that as we grew, we got more siloed and there were fewer people that had the bird's eye view into the whole company.
Yeah.
And so it was like, okay, do we want to have more meetings? No, let's invite more people to the meetings we have and change how we're reporting on commitments and results of those commitments so that more people have visibility and we're not either doing redundant work or making sure that if someone has something that can help another department, that's getting communicated and is visible. So it's like, yeah, like you said, just iterating on even the most basic things we do. When's the weekly leadership team meeting and who comes, right?
And sometimes it's the smallest of changes that are required. And honestly, we're going through the exact same thing. We have a new sort of like level of leadership at Fahrenheit where everyone plays a role and how they play a role, while not, one, having redundancies, two, not having the entire organization on one meeting, but also making sure that information is flowing through part of the organization, I think is so critical to that growth and to that success. Something we talked about earlier also that has really been ringing on my mind is like, in addition to being obsessed with what you do, you also maybe have to be a little crazy, right? And like, how does crazy show up for you and for, Dylan, who's the founder of Mindbloom, and for your organization as a whole? Because I think having an idea like bringing ketamine therapy into the homes of individuals across the country is sort of a crazy idea. In reality, we know, because we're in on the secret, that it's a much needed idea.
Right.
But to many, it's a crazy idea. And to execute it and to actually operationalize that business, it's crazy. So tell me a little bit about how you feel crazy plays a role.
Yeah, I'd love to. Mike Solana at Pirate Wires now throws this event called Hereticon. And we've kind of taken this mantle of like being heretics. We've taken that to heart and kind of tried to say, all right, like we're going to be heretical. We're going to do things that challenge the status quo because the status quo is actually just not working for a lot of people. And so embrace radical ideas. We're a big feedback-based culture. So we kind of, no bad ideas in a brainstorm. We try to live that. But usually the ideas that we're rejecting are the ones that aren't crazy enough rather than the ones that are too crazy. Because the truth is, like, if we're going to grow this from, tens or hundreds of thousands of people doing ketamine therapy a year to millions and hopefully ending the mental health crisis, it's going to be step change growth that gets you there, not incremental, smaller growth, right? So one example that I'll give you, and this is my personal favorite, we went out to change federal law on telemedicine prescribing. And if you told me, 5 years ago that I'd be walking into the US House and Senate to talk about psychedelic
with no beta blockers?
Correct. I would have said you were out of your mind. But not to get too far into legal weeds, it used to be you couldn't prescribe a controlled substance through telemedicine. The law was from 2008. It was the height of the opioid crisis, and some poor guy named Ryan Haight bought opioid pills through some website and overdosed and died. And they said, okay, if you want to prescribe a controlled substance, you need to see a doctor in person. Made sense at the time, but they also saw that telemedicine was going to be a thing in the future. So they made this exception. They said, all right, we direct the DEA to issue a rulemaking process to allow doctors to register to prescribe through telehealth. But the DEA never did it. So 14 years later, Congress was like, hey, DEA, we meant it. You have 1 year to do this. That's actually why Dylan started Mindbloom, was he saw that in 1 year, the DEA was supposed to do this and kind of enable this telehealth pathway. They still didn't do their job, though. And the thing that enabled that to happen was COVID. When COVID happened, Congress and the administration worked together and waived that requirement and allowed prescribing through telehealth.
Got it.
That's what allowed Mindbloom to start doing at-home ketamine therapy at scale. When the pandemic ended, it was going to go away. And I was looking around, I was like, all right, the default is when this public health emergency ends, that waiver disappears and everything will go back to in-person. So I said, all right, surely someone's working on this, right? Hired 2 lobbying teams to canvass DC. We looked at a bunch of, registrations, disclosures, asked people on the relevant committees, who's talking about this, who's working on this? The answer was no one.
Wow.
Literally no one was working on this. And I think it was because nobody wanted to touch controlled substances. This company, Cerebral, got in some trouble around Adderall prescribing. It kind of was a poison pill in the space, and nobody really had the guts to do it. And I don't know if you're a Harry Potter fan, but okay. At the end of Prisoner of Azkaban, he's watching himself get killed by these dementors, and he's waiting for someone to show up and cast the Patronus, and all of a sudden he realizes, like, no one's showing up. I gotta do this.
Yeah.
Right? That was kind of our moment. We were like, no one's showing up, man. Like, if we don't do this. And so I said to Dylan, I was like, hey man, we got to go change federal law. And he's like, fuck you. Like, no, we're a tiny startup. Like, what are you talking about? And I was like, hey man, if not us, who?
You're like, I'm also a lawyer. So
right.
This is coming in handy.
Yeah, good news, right? And so I basically went out and lobbied Congress and the administration on telemedicine prescribing. And I met with 38 senators, congressmen, and exec branch folks talking about ketamine therapy and, doing this at home and why we needed telehealth. It was a crazy thing to do. And a lot of people were like, hey, someone should do this, but not you. Don't have the ketamine guys doing it. And I was like, if you want to step up, be my guest. But I don't think anybody else has the guts to do this. And nobody did. And it worked. We got this preserved. And that's why we're still here and why others are prescribing hormone therapy and other mental health treatments, buprenorphine for addiction. All this is available through telehealth because we got the ball rolling and we got this moving. And we actually got the federal government to keep this in place. It was a bit of a crazy thing to do, but it was just like, hey, if we don't do this, people are going to die. People depend on telehealth for their health care. This is the future. And if Congress and the DEA aren't going to get the picture, we need to show them the picture. And it worked.
It's an amazing story because it just shows, one, that being crazy can pay off.
Yeah.
But 2, also, I think something that many of us in our entrepreneurship and our life feel is that someone else has the ability, the skills, the talent, or the tools to do that thing. And we look towards it and we admire it and we think it can never be us.
Yeah.
And I think it's such an inspiring story because at the end of the day, you were like the small engine that could, whatever
Totally.
that I never get those metaphors right. The small engine that could, just making your way, lobbying, and you did it.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a powerful point, which is all it really takes is hard work, a deep level of obsession, right? A real passion, and you can kind of do anything.
Yeah.
And while there are many probably larger organizations out there that were in or exploring the world of telehealth, you guys, this small, relatively small startup,
Totally,
in a really taboo space, made it happen.
Yeah. And you hit on such an important point. I think so I'm 35, you're 35? Yeah, I'm 35. I had the same experience of and especially, being in a law firm, there are these senior partners, the gray hairs that have been doing it forever. And you're just kind of used to looking up a ladder and kind of looking up at some people farther along in their careers who have done those things. You say, okay, I'm not there yet. I'm just Mike. I'm just some kid or some guy or whatever.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're looking around and you're like, okay, where's that person? Where's the person with the magic wand? And you're okay, they're not there. You can either step up and do it, or you can say, oh, I guess this is going to fail. And
Totally.
Having the courage of your convictions and the belief in yourself, I think you can just, people do amazing things, but one of the big lessons that we're also kind of embracing at Mindbloom right now is like, you can just do things. And I think like, weirdly, what's happening on X over the past few years is kind of one of the things that gave us some courage that people, it used to be that a corporate statement went through 9 levels of PR and legal review. Maybe you went through the New York Times to try to put a statement out or whatever. And now people are just out there and CEOs, founders are just saying things. They're not proofreading it. They're not polishing it. And there's kind of this broader acceptance now that like people are human. People make mistakes, and the right statement isn't necessarily the one that went through 9 levels of review. It's an authentic human one.
Yeah.
And so we're all kind of just trying to step into like our authentic selves and like, yeah, I'm a lawyer. I can go talk to people in Congress. Why don't I just go do it?
Yeah.
Or like you're a marketer. You want to say something new or different about ketamine. Let's just say it, just doing the thing rather than having 10 meetings to plan and talk about it is really the thing we're trying to embrace.
One of our values at Fahrenheit is do the work.
Yeah.
And it literally came from all these years of me being like, I don't have the skills or I don't have the idea or I don't know exactly how to do this. And I think fear stopping me or stopping others around me from actually just doing it.
Yeah.
And then I one day was just like, okay, I'm just going to do this damn thing.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to lock myself in a room and I'm going to do it. And every time that I did it, one of 2 things happened. It was either really good and I got pushed to get it to be great, or it wasn't really good and I still got pushed to make it great.
And here you are.
And here I am surviving. And the best part is when you actually do the work and then you realize, no, you actually know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think that is a really powerful thing where it's a behavior that gets learned over many, many years. The first time we do anything, we have never done it before. No matter who you are, whether you're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, whether you are starting out in the first day of your career or trying something new, we are freshmen, and I talk about this a lot, but you are freshmen in any moment all the time. Even sitting here today, we've never had this conversation before, and here we are just doing it. And so I think there is such a powerful message in there because the distance between who you are and the person you think is more skilled, better, smarter to do that thing normally is actually much shorter than we feel. What happens in that distance is actually just doing it.
Yes.
And we have this rule at Fahrenheit, I call it the 80% rule, which is like, don't come to me with something 30% done, 20% done, or even really 90. Come to me when it's 80% done, which shows you've done the work.
Yeah.
Even if you think it's shit, even if you've never done it before, come to me with your version of 80% and I will help you take it to 20. But you have to lock yourself in that room at that desk and actually do it. And I feel like sometimes that's just fear that stops us, fear of what people are going to think, fear of failure, fear of getting yelled at by your boss, which in our environment and culture does not happen, but does in others. So I think it's really one of those things that's just such a cheat sheet. It's just like, do it.
Yeah.
You'll be fine.
I completely agree. One of the things we talk about at Mindbloom a lot is we have 4 core values, and one of them is making exceptional decisions. It's not always what people expect. The way to make exceptional decisions is to use case-appropriate levels of rigor. Some decisions are one-way doors. No way to undo that. You're stepping through. There's no turning back. Some decisions are 2-way doors. Hey, we can do this, and if it doesn't work, we'll just switch it back. And so, like, to your point about getting to the 80%, like, it's totally right. You're getting from 0 to 80 is probably the most important part. Getting from like 98 to 99, not that important. And it's fear. It's fear of getting toward the end of it. But
definitely
using the appropriate level of time and focus and energy and reference calls and whatever else it might be is important to avoid paralysis, right? And
absolutely
deciding what kind of decision it is a one-way decision or 2-way. But the other side of it is like getting rid of that fear of failure. And I feel like that's gotten a little trite, but yet we still all struggle with it.
Totally.
I think one of the biggest things that we try to like remind people is like, we are all very minor characters in everybody else's story. And people remember your failure infinitely less than you do. You fail, maybe you hold on to it. Hopefully you learn something from it, but nobody else is really holding on to your failures because they're worried about their own. And so like letting people let go of that fear of failure and not punishing them when something doesn't go right. Just like, okay, what do we learn? What do we want to do differently next time? And then move on is like a really powerful way to build a company where people aren't scared to just try things or do things. Is like, don't punish failure.
Part of the beautiful thing about this era that we're in, where mental health, particularly in the workplace is becoming more fostered, and I think there's more awareness around the importance of it, I think is that freedom. It's sort of freeing all of us, freeing our employees, our colleagues, ourselves from this feeling or this understanding that we have to be perfect all the time, and that the journey is actually a series of wins, losses, failures and successes, and how we navigate it collaboratively as teams is ultimately what's most important. And some of my biggest failures in my career have actually been my biggest wins. Some of my biggest failures have actually brought me to the most important place or the biggest aha moment. And so now when I look at them, I actually kind of get excited from failure. I'm like, failure can be fun. Failure can be a moment, and it's so similar to the work, right? Just like how in ketamine or any assisted therapy, you have an opportunity to look more objectively at things. I feel like in the workplace, I try to look more objectively at my wins, my losses, my successes and failures, and know they're all okay. And they're all a part of being an entrepreneur, because you got to be a little bit crazy and you have to be obsessed. And there's no way to have that level of crazy or obsession without also sometimes falling on your ass or totally fucking it up. And so I feel like, for you, and just to kind of close us out, obviously you're in this really amazing place in this sort of new world that we're living in, where mental health and these new therapies are both desired and also being used, right? I mean, we're living in the sea change. What do you think is next in the world of psychedelic therapy?
The easy answer is that new medicines will be approved by FDA, and all of a sudden people will have a broader menu of options available to them for their mental health. And so, when you compare some of these medicines, MDMA has been trialed for PTSD. I think the specifics of that medicine, it really does help with self-love and overcoming trauma, and it will be really powerful for that. Whether it also will be used for, depression or anxiety, I'm not sure. Ketamine is a really powerful depression treatment. I think once MDMA is approved, it'll continue to be used for depression, but you will have more options available. And then psilocybin will come out. And psilocybin is being used for depression. It's also being used for addiction. LSD is being trialed for anxiety, primarily. Ibogaine for addiction. And so you're just going to have this menu of treatment options. And what's right for you might depend on what you're struggling with, but also with your life. For some people, like the optimal course of MDMA therapy or psilocybin therapy will require you to set aside multiple days of your life to do that. One of the benefits of ketamine therapy is you're back to your baseline in 90 minutes, And so for me, I'll fit a Mindbloom session in on a weeknight. I'll work during the day, do a Mindbloom session, then eat dinner with my wife, see my baby, and, maybe log back on or maybe not, but like it fits into my day. And so I think the big change is going to come as more of these medicines are available. What are people using them for? And then where are they using them?
And how are they using them?
And how are they using them? And you may use multiple, you may use one, you may find that one medicine just works for you. But I think we are, as a society, getting ready to transition off taking daily pills, SSRIs and other things like that. I mean, we are a very heavily medicated culture. I think we're also a poisoned culture when it comes to some of the things in our food and in our products, microplastics, PFAS, heavy metals, pesticides, all these things. And so I think the broader cultural shift that's underway is a depoisoning. And I think psychedelics will help people stop poisoning themselves with too many drugs, too many negative thoughts that poison our mental landscape every day. And I think that's really the big transition. The other side, to get a little more technical, is AI. There are some wild stats coming out about how many Americans are using ChatGPT as their therapist, as their boyfriend or girlfriend.
Oh, yeah.
As much as that can be hard to wrap your head around, at Mindbloom, we're leaning into it. And so we're building, AI intention setting features into the app, journaling features, things to kind of act as a psychedelic coach in your pocket. And I think there's this unbelievable opportunity with AI to give people more support, more help, more tools to help them. And so I think the system for mental health has been largely one size fits all. And we are going to get a lot more bespoke and a lot more personal in the medicines that are available and right for you, and in the tools we have to support you that are made specifically for you and not for 50 million use.
Amazing. To a less poisonous world.
Cheers to that.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Truly, I really love the convo, and it means a lot to me considering the journey that you've been on, your personal, change that you've gone through leveraging Mindbloom and the ketamine therapy, that you were able to sit here today and have this conversation and be able to share your story. I think it's like so inspiring.
Well,
honestly.
thank you. I really appreciate that. And I appreciated your sharing yours too. I mean, I got chills hearing it because it resonated so much with my own experience. But I'm so grateful for people like you who are making platforms to share stories like this and let people know that they're not alone, that we're all struggling with one thing or another, and that there are ways to heal and there is a path through. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just a regular person. I mean that.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, I started Fahrenheit because I love to raise brands, and I've been building brands my whole career. And I would argue that I've been successful in a certain capacity, right? However you deem success, but that success hasn't been without all the things, all the things that so many people feel and experience. And I felt like I had to pretend to be perfect. I had these high-powered jobs, and I was working for Michael Kors, and you mentioned your journey. Mine was like, you were like in suits. I was like in The Devil Wears Prada, never sleeping, running around like a maniac, feeling the constant obsession with what I did, which I think is large in part where my work ethic comes from, but also all the other things, the burnout, the fear of failure, the imposter syndrome, the exhaustion. And I think realizing like I actually did not have to live this way, and that I have a choice, and that I have a say in my own mental and emotional well-being. I think the first step was recognizing I have that choice. Yeah. The second step was acting on that choice, which in many ways brought me to psychedelic medicine. And then the third is realizing, I can actually work on this, and I have these keys, and I can unlock the ability to heal. Yeah. And so I think my mental health journey has been a huge part of my life and how I lead at Fahrenheit. And I think the products and services and people out there that are actually doing this, I play my part by bringing mindful leadership to my organization. And we hope it rubs off, like we always hope it trickles, has a little bit of an effect on those that we work with, on our clients, our partners. But what you guys are doing is actually really giving people that tool. And so I'm so grateful as well. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Farryn.
Awesome.
Really a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to this special Mental Health Month episode of the Fahrenheit podcast. We're proud to be a part of this important conversation, and we hope it inspires you to keep going. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen so you never miss an episode. See you next time. If you're going through a tough time or struggling, you are not alone. You can text HOME, HOME, to 741-741 anytime to reach a trained crisis counselor. It's free, available 24/7, and completely confidential.